If an alliance that lasted 80 years can be shaken by just one presidential term, is there any international relationship that's truly permanent? When America's longtime allies, from Australia to Canada, from Japan to Poland, speak out, back away, or seek their own paths, the world is witnessing something unprecedented: the quiet collapse of the post-Cold War order. So what's really happening behind the scenes of global diplomacy in 2025? Do you think the US is gradually losing its role as the pivot in the global democratic alliance? Let's dive into each story to see the widening cracks. This video is for analysis and educational purposes only, and does not represent any political stance or organization. Let's look at everything with an open and objective mind. Number 10. Ukraine, ally or existential test? America's image as the global defender of democracy is visibly cracking, and Ukraine is the most painful proof. In 2025, while Kyiv is still holding the front lines against Russia, the Trump administration suddenly announced a suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing, a $13.5 billion decision that immediately tilted the balance of the war. Since the conflict erupted in 2022, Ukraine has lost nearly 30% of its GDP, 9 million people have been displaced, and over 60% of its energy infrastructure destroyed. International aid, especially from the US, has been its lifeline, but now Ukraine is caught between a grinding war and the cold withdrawal of its number one ally. Trump justified the move with the term pragmatic peace negotiation, but Western diplomats call it a euphemism for an asymmetrical deal favoring Moscow. While 82% of Ukrainians oppose any deal that involves territorial loss, Ukrainian Social Survey 2025, Washington has quietly excluded Kyiv from key NATO summits, a clear signal that the U.S. is narrowing its regional leadership role. In a survival response, Kyiv is rapidly localizing its defense industry, signing nearly $3 billion in contracts with European arms firms, and negotiating tech transfers on drones and radar with Turkey, South Korea, and Israel. Ukraine is no longer betting on loyalty. It's betting on itself. If you were Ukraine's leader, would you keep fighting alone or make concessions for temporary peace? If you find this kind of analysis helps you better understand today's shifting global politics, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Number 9. Japan, a shaky alliance under Big Brother pressure. From a cornerstone ally to the architect of its own path, Japan in 2025 no longer stands simply under Washington's umbrella, but is stitching its own defensive shield against increasingly unpredictable geopolitical storms. Tensions escalated when Trump demanded Tokyo raise defense spending to 3.5% of GDP, double its current level, and threatened to exit the treaty if unmet. Meanwhile, Japan had already pledged to raise defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027, a historic move, though Trump still called it insufficient. But Japanese leaders didn't stand still. Tokyo unveiled a new generation fighter jet, fully developed domestically, with a total investment of over $20 billion, and restructured its self-defense forces to allow preemptive strikes, breaking from its purely defensive doctrine since 1947. Economically, the proposed reintroduction of a 25% tariff on Japanese cars, which make up 12% of Japan's total exports, is pushing firms like Toyota and Honda toward EU, ASEAN, and South Asian markets. At the same time, Japan is expanding its friendshoring strategy, moving factories from China to Vietnam, India, and Indonesia to avoid U.S. policy volatility and supply chain risks. Diplomatically, Tokyo is strengthening the Quad alliance with Australia, India, and the UK, and boosting independent military ties with the EU. The message is clear: alliances cannot be based on ultimatums. Is Japan paving the way for a new era of strategic sovereignty in Asia, where regional powers no longer wait on Washington's decisions? Should Japan stay aligned with the U.S. alliance or boldly pursue full autonomy? Number 8. South Korea, designing its own escape from America's shadow. After over 7 decades alongside the US since the Korean War, South Korea enters 2025 with a clear shift in strategic thinking. No longer the ally that always says yes, but a partner redrawing its own security map. Financial pressure from Washington was the first flashpoint. President Trump demanded Seoul pay $5 billion annually for the U.S. military presence on the peninsula, nearly triple the 2019 amount, which had already been a point of contention. Behind that figure is the message: those who are protected must pay, which runs counter to the burden-sharing spirit South Korea expected in a lasting alliance. A 2025 Gallup Korea poll showed 74% of Koreans support reducing reliance on the U.S. military. In response, Seoul raised defense spending to 3% of GDP, accelerated the KF-21 Boramae fighter program, and launched a new radar system developed by Hanwha Systems for both domestic use and export. Alongside, Seoul is fast-tracking its K-defense strategy, exporting weapons to boost global influence, with major deals like K-2 tanks and K-9 artillery to Poland, the UAE, and Romania, showing that Korea is no longer a security consumer, but a provider. Geopolitically, Seoul expanded ties with Japan, Australia, and Vietnam, and is negotiating a trilateral Korea-Japan-Philippines security dialogue to counter Beijing and Pyongyang's military actions. Meanwhile, a $12 billion FTA with the European Union is aimed at reducing risks from volatile U.S. tariffs. Amid North Korea's recent claim of fitting nuclear warheads on medium-range ballistic missiles, South Korea's message is clear: national security cannot depend on any politician's emotional stability, even an ally. This video draws from public reports, news outlets, and discussion forums. We neither endorse nor oppose any policy or political stance. Our sole aim is to offer multi-dimensional views and spark thoughtful reflection on today's pressing global issues. Number 7. Australia. When strategic trust starts to crack? As the global security order unravels, Canberra is actively redesigning its foreign policy, no longer placing blind faith in the U.S. The 80-year alliance between Australia and the United States is experiencing an unprecedented chill. In Trump's second term, the pay-for-protection doctrine isn't just off-putting. It's making Australia question the true value of the AUKUS Pact, especially after Trump said U.S. commitments could be withdrawn unless allies raise defense spending to 3% of GDP. Meanwhile, Trump's erratic stance on China is putting Canberra in a bind. Australia views China as a strategic rival, especially after cyber attacks on infrastructure in 2023. Yet, with bilateral trade reaching 290 billion Australian dollars in 2024, China remains its biggest economic partner, trapping Australia between geopolitics and commerce. Amid Washington's inconsistency, Canberra raised defense spending to 2.4% of GDP, a record high, and broadened security ties with India, Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Notably, a new $5 billion Australian dollars defense pact. With Jakarta signals Australia's shift toward a multi-centered security strategy rather than relying on a single axis. Australia isn't severing ties with the US, but it's betting on self-reliance. And in a region as volatile as the Indo-Pacific, that's not just a choice, it's a necessity. Number 6, United Kingdom. No longer America's quiet friend. With a shared history through 2 world wars, the US-UK relationship was once described as a transatlantic lifeline. But in 2025, that current is slowing. Colder, more cautious. Under Trump's second term, Britain no longer sees clear strategic value in maintaining what was once called a special relationship. Pressure from the White House to force Britain to accept U.S. food standards, including hormone-injected beef and chlorine-washed poultry, was rejected by over 70% of voters in a February 2025 Ipsos poll. At the same time, London refused demands to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, an unrealistic target amid economic growth of just 0.9% in Q1, and inflation still hovering at 4.1%. Trump's erratic statements on NATO and evasiveness on Ukraine have raised red flags in London. Recently, the UK Ministry of Defence announced a £3 billion increase for the Northern Fleet, focused on deterring Russia in the North Atlantic, independent of US forces. Notably, the British Parliament has just passed the legal framework for an expanded European defence agreement, involving Germany, France, and Sweden, the first time London has formalized its European military role since Brexit. This is a highly symbolic move, signaling that the UK is ready to forge a replacement security axis, no longer reliant on Washington. Number 5. Taiwan, torn between security and economics. In the geopolitical chessboard of Asia, Taiwan was once America's tightly held piece, a crucial tech partner and strategic frontline against China. But by 2025, Washington's next move took an unexpected turn. Not with warships or bases, but with a sharp tariff blow to one of its closest allies. In his second term, President Trump imposed a 32% tariff on various tech products from Taiwan, including machinery, electronic parts, and vehicles, while excluding semiconductors, a sector where the U.S. remains heavily dependent. The stated reason was to reduce Taiwan's dominance in global supply chains and push U.S. domestic chip production. TSMC, the world's largest chipmaker, now controls 54% of the global market, and the sector contributes 39% of Taiwan's total exports. As a result, in the first half of 2025, Taiwanese firms lost over $8 billion due to the new trade barriers. Simultaneously, Trump suggested Taipei should share more of the defense burden, despite Taiwan having already spent over $10 billion on U.S. arms, including F-16s and Patriot systems. The backlash wasn't just governmental. Mass protests erupted in Taipei, denouncing the pay-to-be-protected policy. Wasting no time, Taiwan signed an FTA with Japan, entered talks with the EU, and expanded joint military exercises with Australia and the Philippines, signaling a clear strategy. Survival cannot depend on just one superpower. Number 4. Poland. From loyal student to new strategist. Poland was once seen as America's most steadfast ally in Eastern Europe. But by 2025, that role is shifting. Not through loud proclamations, but through quiet, deliberate strategy. When the Trump administration pushed NATO to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, double the alliance's agreed benchmark, Warsaw, despite already spending 3.9% and signing $14 billion in U.S. arms deals, was still labeled not enthusiastic enough. Suspicion grew and Poland began to reposition itself. In 2025, its Ministry of Defense proposed creating an EU Rapid Reaction Force, independent of NATO, while advancing participation in programs like PESCO and the European Sky Shield. Defense ties with Germany, France, and the Baltics are expanding in both scale and depth. At home, Warsaw ramped up local arms manufacturing, developing the next-generation Wilk tank with technical help from South Korea. On the economic front, wary of U.S. tariff threats, Poland is shifting trade toward Japan, India, and especially the Middle East, where it just signed a $3 billion infrastructure deal with Saudi Arabia. According to a 2025 CBOS survey, only 42% of Poles still trust the U.S., nearly half the figure from 3 years ago. Warsaw's message is clear. An alliance cannot rest solely on weapons. It must be built on mutual trust. Number 3. Germany, as Berlin steps out from Washington's shadow. Berlin is stepping out of Washington's shadow, not with loud declarations, but with a series of strategically rebuilding decisions. In 2025, faced with Trump's demand to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, Germany not only refused but chose to redefine security with an independent roadmap, creating a European-led version of NATO. The defense budget has risen to 72 billion euros, an all-time high, but more noteworthy is the investment in intra-European weapon systems like the FCAS fighter jet, Germany, France, Spain, and a Berlin-led project to strengthen cyber warfare capabilities. Notably, in March 2025, Germany passed a new law allowing the EU to establish a €30 billion defense fund, fully separate from NATO, a move with clear political deterrence. Economically, tensions continue to escalate. After the US imposed a 25% tariff on European EVs, Volkswagen and BMW saw US sales fall by 15% and 12% respectively. In response, Berlin and Brussels announced a Quick Response Mechanism, QRM, targeting US pharma and biotech firms. Meanwhile, Chancellor Scholz has publicly endorsed President Macron's proposal to establish a European Union Strategic Orientation Committee, with the goal of gradually replacing NATO's role in regional security by 2030. Clearly, Germany no longer wants to be America's border guard. Instead, it is rewriting the rules, not on its own continent. Number 2. Canada rises. Is the era of U.S. dependence over? Once hailed as the model neighbors of the West, U.S.-Canada relations in 2025 are now entering unprecedented tension, not seen since the Cold War. Instead of handshakes across the world's longest border, Ottawa and Washington are steadily drifting apart. Not due to ideological divides, but because of increasingly divergent strategic calculations. The spark was a wave of hardline trade policies under Trump's second term. Tariffs on over $17 billion worth of Canadian exports, especially lumber, aluminum, steel, and dairy, caused bilateral trade to drop 12% in less than a year. But the biggest psychological blow came from Trump's sarcastic remark suggesting Canada should become America's 51st state. A comparison steeped in condescension, violating North America's diplomatic norms of equality. Unsurprisingly, Canadian public trust in the U.S. plummeted. An Angus Reid poll showed 76% of Canadians now view the U.S. as an unreliable partner, the lowest since 1981. As a response, Ottawa is clearly pivoting. Delaying the $19 billion Canadian F-35 deal was the first sign. Canada has also signed a $6 billion trade pact with the UK, while accelerating strategic talks with the EU, Japan, and South Korea. In security, Ottawa is strengthening European coordination and taking a more proactive role in NORAD reform, aiming to reduce reliance on the U.S. for aerospace defense and early warning systems. Number 1. France redefining power in a post-American world. Quiet but resolute, France is repositioning its global role by gradually detaching from U.S. influence. In 2025, President Emmanuel Macron not only raised defense spending to a record €60 billion, but also launched an independent space command, signaling a strategic ambition for high-tech military autonomy. Tensions with the U.S. are no longer exceptional. They've become systemic. Trump's call for NATO countries to spend 5% of GDP on defense, while France allocates only 2.3%, is seen in Paris as coercive and a violation of multilateral spirit. Meanwhile, U.S. tariffs on French goods like wine, perfume, and electric cars, including the Renault Megane EV, have slashed exports to the U.S. by 18% in Q1 2025, according to Eurostat. France's response is to build flexible alliances, from boosting intra-European arms manufacturing with Germany and Spain to signing new trade deals worth $9.4 billion with China and India. Additionally, France is negotiating to become an observer in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, an unprecedented move for a NATO member. Facing an increasingly uncertain global order, Paris makes it clear alliances cannot be based on threats and conditions. They must be rooted in mutual interest and genuine respect. As more U.S. allies choose to pursue a Plan B, it reflects not only strategic fragmentation but also raises a deeper question. Can a superpower maintain global leadership through military strength alone if trust is broken? In a volatile, multipolar world, lasting alliances cannot be built on pressure or temporary gains. They must be nurtured with partnership, respect, and long-term commitment. Perhaps it's time for Washington to ask itself, is it reinforcing its leadership or isolating itself on a shifting global chessboard? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We respect all perspectives shared with a spirit of dialogue. See you in the next video.